The blueprint compromises. To understand the night the numbers go strange, we need to stand in the room where the numbers were born. Drafting tables, slide rules, ashtrays with long meetings ground into them. Hydrology baselines pulled from a record that felt long enough because back then it was all anyone had. Storms were plotted as tidy bell curves. A probable maximum flood was calculated with margins that felt generous. The tails looked thin because the past made them look that way. The concrete chosen was a kind engineers trusted, an arch-gravity hybrid that pushes into canyon walls while leaning on its own weight. Elegant, if the rock on both sides is as strong as the survey says, but rock isn't a uniform. It's a story of ancient water, pressure, and time. Lift joints, those horizontal seams between concrete pores, were keyed and grouted to behave like one monolith. On paper, the sheer keys lock. Underground, uplift pressures search for any place. A film of water can slip in and turn a seam into a lever. Spillways were the safety valves. Two side channels with drum gates, a chute intended to throw fury away from the wall and into the river. Design capacity, enormous, but capacity is a number tied to assumptions. Flow velocities above certain thresholds turn water into a grinder. Cavitation creates vacuum pockets that collapse like hammers, spalling concrete, biting at rebar, making a smooth chute rougher minute by minute. The fix is aeration and hard, polished surfaces. Those details cost money, time, and political patience. Seismic allowances went in too, not just for a single jolt, but for shaking that can loosen abutment interlocks and rattle gates. Back when the drawings were made, the regional fault maps were simpler. Peak ground accelerations were input as conservative estimates for that era. Since then, faults have been mapped tighter, and shaking models have grown teeth. The dam is strong, but strength has to meet the right kind of hit. Chemistry had a seat at the table, even if it didn't get a vote. Alkali-silica reaction, ASR, sounds like lab talk until it starts growing gel in micro cracks, expanding like slow moss inside the concrete, turning compression into microtension, swelling joints a millimeter at a time. Over decades, ASR can jam gates, distort alignments, and make routine maintenance feel like surgery. It doesn't mean collapse by itself. It means margins shrink without announcing themselves. Cost-cutting hid in plain sight. A governor wanted ribbon day before election season. A contractor proposed a substitution, a different aggregate, a phased spillway lining plan, a slightly thinner apron because the model said it would hold. Each move defensible. Together, they pushed the risk into corners nobody visits until the water does. Phased fixes turned into phased deferrals. We'll address aeration in Phase II. Phase II lives on a budget slide that never clears committee. What nobody talked about, dams rarely fail from a single insult. They fail when rarities stack. High inflows arrive after a drought-stiffened basin that sheds water faster. The operators hesitate because public optics hate wasting water. Gates cycle more than planned. A small chip in concrete becomes a notch that spawns a jet. The powerhouse trips offline, so the spillway takes more. That extra push drives uplift harder under a keyway. Each piece still within spec, but all of them together leaning toward a night like this. Meanwhile, the hydrology itself shifted. Atmospheric rivers got fatter, warmer, and stacked closer together. The old return period language, 100-year, 500-year, rests on stationarity, the idea that the past predicts the future. When the future's dice get loaded, those comfort words go brittle. Probable maximum flood guidance should have been updated more often. It was. Committees requested new studies. The studies waited on appropriations. Meanwhile, the river wrote its own update. Inside the powerhouse, penstocks, the big steel pipes were sized to feed turbines optimally, not to pass a flood. Turbines can move a lot of water, but only if vibration stays within limits. When drafts cavitate and bearings heat, operators throttle back to save the machine. That's smart for 1 hour, dangerous for the next 6. Bypass options exist, but they're finite and were never meant for compound extremes. Responsibility split like the river downstream. One agency owns the dam, another buys the power, local districts own levees, counties manage alerts. In meetings, that sounds like collaboration. At midnight, it's a patchwork of dashboards and protocols. A dam operator can open gates, a sheriff can order evacuations, a grid dispatcher begs for stability. Each actor manages their slice. The river manages all of it at once. The drawings anticipated wear and tear. They didn't anticipate politics. A drought narrative can make early drawdowns look reckless. Why release when we just spent 5 years praying for rain? So pre-releases wait until confidence is high, which means later, which means closer to the cliff. The best time to lower reservoir is before the storm forecast looks certain. The law often demands certainty before authority clicks in. Here's the uncomfortable truth the blueprint can't say out loud. Safety is dynamic. It lives in updated models, functioning sensors, real drills, and the humility to admit that designed margins have drifted. The math looks safe because the math was honest about the past. The climate, the chemistry, the politics, and the money rewrote the dice. And the dice don't care what the legend on the original plan set promised. Drought, then deluge. 3 summers in a row, the lake dropped like a clock losing minutes. Every week the bathtub ring climbed higher, chalk white against red rock, a scar you could measure from the highway. Intake towers rose out of the receding blue like abandoned elevators, their lower mouths flirting with air. Operators watched the levels slide past comfort marks and into territory the original manuals treated as theory. Heat waves stacked, not the dry heat people used to joke about. This was a heat that changed math. Evaporation turned acres into sky. The surface area shrank, but the rate didn't care. Each degree shaved days off storage. Maintenance windows that required low water should have been a gift. Instead, deferred work met deferred budgets. A crack logged at monitor stayed monitor. An inspection dive noted spalling near a gate recess. The follow-up was penciled for next fiscal year. Onshore, crews walked delta fans that weren't there a decade earlier. Silt settled where cool water used to plunge, changing currents, nudging pressure where designers didn't plan. Trash racks clogged more often with driftwood and plastic, telling a story nobody had time to read. The lake, once a buffer you could count on, felt thinner, less like a bank account, more like a line of credit with fees. Then the forecasts shifted tone. Early winter storms underperformed. Snowpack lagged, then suddenly didn't. A parade of atmospheric rivers started drawing lines across satellite images, warmer than the ones in old case studies. They climbed the coast, wrung themselves out over mountains, and kept arriving. Each one alone would have been a headline year. Together, they looked like a dare. Hydrologists called it hydrologic whiplash. A basin baked into concrete by drought doesn't sip, it sheds. So when the first big warm storm hit a modest snowpack, runoff ramped fast. Reservoirs upstream held low for years, filled quicker than rules of thumb expected. Operators had space, they used it. By Storm 2, the snowpack had doubled. By Storm 3, the snow had turned dense and primed. Rain fell on it, heavy, warm, relentless, and suddenly the snowpack wasn't storage. It was fuel. Here's the kink: empty space is only safety if you understand refill rate. The playbook treated storms as pulses with breath between them. Release a little, watch the gauges adjust. The reality was stacked systems, watersheds saturated, tributaries peaking simultaneously, and forecasts hedging just enough to make early aggressive releases look premature. Public pressure still hummed under everything. After so many dry years, nobody wanted to see water wasted to the sea. From the control room, the lake curve turned steeper than anyone liked. Incremental releases got bumped to strong releases. Calls went out to downstream districts, watch levels, deploy crews. Grid dispatchers asked for steady power through the storm, turbines obliged, until vibration alarms started to chatter. Running hard in cold, sediment-rich inflow is different than running hard in a calm summer. Bearings feel it. Draft tubes feel it. The operators felt it in their ribs. A technician took the night shift, lake reading by habit, even with digital sensors blinking it in neon. He chalked the staff gauge at 2 a.m. and again at 10 a.m., 6 feet apart on the same concrete. He logged it, stared at the pencil mark, and for a second didn't trust his own hand. The lake, which used to move inches a day, was now a living thing. Upstream reservoir managers called with their own bad news. They were full and sending. One had an unplanned gate maintenance issue that narrowed options. Another faced inflow from a burn scar, blackened slopes delivering ash and logs that would become somebody else's debris problem. The river system was behaving like a single body, every limb thrashing at once. Forecast models tried to keep up. Ensembles showed a spread of outcomes, most of them ugly. A late burst of cold could have paused things, bought days. It didn't. The next atmospheric river trended south but retained its punch. Snow lines rose. Snow turned to slush, then to runoff that bypassed soil. Staff hydrologists started talking in shorter sentences. The words "probable maximum" got thrown around in a tone that meant "we may find out." Operators leaned into the only levers they controlled: gates, turbines, spill priority. The playbook said gradual increase. Reality said stair-step now, not later. But every step up sent a different problem downstream. Levee districts with century flood designs were already near the top of their play. Bridges collected mats of trees and fencing. A hurried call asked the dam to pulse instead of roar to ease a vulnerable reach. The request made sense for them, not for the canyon. Meanwhile, maintenance ghosts came back. An aeration upgrade on the spillway had been scoped but not installed. At low to moderate flows, it didn't matter. At high velocities, the lack would matter. A hairline in a transition slab, marked and filed, sat right where water would try to bite. The staff knew every inch of that chute. They also knew they couldn't not use it. A drought teaches caution about letting water go. A deluge punishes hesitation. The lake shrugged off the last foot of comfortable. Radio chatter tightened. A senior engineer pushed for aggressive pre-release 2 days earlier. The memo got parked. Now, with the lake surging, the same move would look like panic on paper, but prudence in the canyon. The window for easy choices had closed, while everyone argued about optics. When water outruns policy, only steel and concrete decide. The shift from drought to deluge wasn't a plot twist. It was the system revealing its new baseline. The river was here to collect on the years we borrowed margin from the future, and it wasn't interested in our reasons. The 3 traps. Midnight writes with numbers, but the river reads the weak spots. 3 traps were set years ago, waiting for the right sequence. Trap 1 sits in plain sight, the spillway. It's the valve you trust until velocity turns water into a tool. At low flows, the chute hums. Push it hard and the flow sheets detach from the concrete, pockets of vapor form and collapse like fists. Cavitation. Each blow is invisible until it is. A smooth surface becomes pitted. Pits become teeth. Teeth catch eddies that pry at rebar. At design meetings, aeration slots were a line item. At this flow, they're a prayer. Operators hear the howl first, a rising metallic note. The river only sings when it's chewing. They add a notch to release more, trying to spread the energy. The notch answers with spray and chips peppering the night. The second trap hides in steel, the powerhouse bypass limit. Penstocks are the muscles of the dam, but they weren't built to sprint a marathon in a thunderstorm. Turbines can pass a lot of water, yet not at any cost. At high heads, draft tubes vibrate, bearings heat. Protective relays don't care about weather, they trip when they must. So when grid dispatch calls begging for steady megawatts, the operators nod, then wince as alarms stack. Throttle slightly, and you save the machine but push more burden to the spillway. Open fully, and you risk tearing a runner apart. It's a choice between expensive damage now or structural danger later. There's no setting labeled, satisfy both physics and politics. Trap 3 is older than the dam. Foundation uplift and seepage. Water under pressure is stubborn. It probes along lift joints, keyways, contact seams with the canyon. Drainage galleries and relief wells are there to bleed that pressure off. They work until head rises faster than they can whisper it away. Instruments start to twitch. Piezometers show small but unmistakable trends. Uplift forces tick higher. An abutment joint that always acted like rock begins to act like a question. Seepage monitors, usually boring, become the only numbers anyone respects. Layered on top is the human split screen. The dam operator answers to reservoir safety and downstream flow limits. The power marketer answers to contracts and a hungry grid. Levee districts answer to sand, riprap, and phone calls from neighborhoods that shouldn't see water. None of them is wrong. Together, they create a trap of divided attention on a night that demands a single mind. Here's where the traps talk to each other. The spillway takes more flow because turbines are rattling. The cavitation damage roughens the chute, which increases turbulence, which magnifies uplift at the toe, which telegraphs pressure back under the dam. The foundation instruments rise, so conservative instinct says ease back, except easing back would push the lake another inch toward the crest. In the control room, you can feel the margin thinning by the way people stop finishing their sentences. The supervisor calls for a gate sequence that's supposed to balance pressure across piers. The timing is tight, staggered openings seconds apart to avoid a hammer. The first gates answer. One lags a beat, sticky from age or cold, or a bit of misalignment no one had time to fix at low water. That single hitch sends an uneven wave into the chute. Cameras catch a section where spray suddenly goes opaque. Concrete is turning to mist. The engineer watching knows that's not just water. Downstream, levee crews burn through their third pallet of sandbags in an hour. A bridge has started to catch debris, and the river is making its own shortcut into a neighborhood designed for quiet mornings. A county voice on the radio asks, "Can you hold for 2 hours?" There is no way to explain that 2 hours tonight is a different thing than 2 hours last spring. The emergency spillway enters the conversation. It's on the drawings, a broad crest meant for rare. Rare is relative now. It's never been pushed to full design. The hillside below it is armored on paper. In the real world, armor only works with flows that don't excavate at the edges. Testing it at midnight in a storm with helicopters grounded by wind feels like handing the river a new tool. Still, the calculation is brutal. Spread the load or watch the crest. Meanwhile, the powerhouse protection scheme did what it was built to do. It tripped. Black start options exist, but they aren't positioned for a storm like this. Spinning reserve that could absorb bumps isn't where the wires need it. Grid frequency wobbles, tightens, wobbles again. Operators throttle a hair more to keep a runner from singing itself apart. That hair shows up at the crest. Every 30 seconds, a new detail edits the plan. A relief well reads high. A gate sticks then freeze with a bang that echoes in the galleries. A seep weep turns to a thread. Someone cracks a joke and nobody laughs. These are professionals, but they're inside a system designed to work only when no part asks for more than its share. The tease is simple and awful. We open everything we can and still lose ground. The lake rises a fraction faster than steel can lower it. The safe margins that look generous in daylight now sit on the wrong side of a decimal point. A number appears on the midnight log that nobody's written before. The traps didn't need to fail individually. They only needed to agree on a minute. Minute 0, warnings ignored. 3 days earlier, the radar started drawing the same bruised stripe over the watershed again and again. Training cells, storms that didn't pass through so much as set up camp. The models hedged, but the pattern was clear enough for anyone who'd stared at a river map longer than a budget hearing. Upstream reservoirs were already flirting with their top lines. Calls went out on quiet channels. We should start moving water. County Emergency Management asked for a pre-release. Politely at first, then with the edge that comes from remembering the last evacuation. The answer wasn't technical, it was political. Drought had rewritten public patience. After years of telling voters to save every drop, nobody wanted to sign the order that sent blue water through a canyon on a forecast. Optics, someone said in a meeting, which is another way of saying, we'll wait. Inside the dam office, an engineer wrote the memo anyway. Early drawdown recommendation, backed by ensembles and a conservative read of the snow line. The math was on his side, but the memo landed on a Friday. The weekend loomed, decision makers dispersed, and the urgency of a graph couldn't beat the inertia of a calendar. It was parked, hold for Monday, as if storms respect weekdays. The siren test had been cut from the quarterly plan months before. Budget triage. The line item that funds a noise people complain about is easy to cross out when nothing is happening. So when the county pushed a reminder text, severe weather possible, be prepared, the replies came back with eye rolls and joke emojis. False alarms teach people to ignore real ones. You only get so many drills before the audience stops showing up. Minute 0 started long before the lake touched the crest. It started when the first request for pre-release ran into drought optics. It started when the engineer's memo met a stack of other memos about roads and schools. It started when the last siren test was cancelled because nobody wanted to explain a loud morning to a quiet neighborhood. All of those small decisions converted manageable flow into panic waiting to be born. Meanwhile, the upstream managers were dealing their own hand. A burn scar watershed sent pulses of black water and logs. Their gates were sticky from cold and silt. They called down with numbers that sounded reasonable until you added them to every other reasonable number. We're at 92% and rising. We're topping out our gate 1. We can hold a day. Each statement true. Together, they formed a sequence that should have triggered the bigger truth. The system was out of slack. In the control room, the senior operator pulled up the composite radar feed and saw the band fattening and pivoting, feeding the headwaters again. He keyed the mic to the county duty officer. "We're making an incremental increase." The county asked for a schedule. He gave them one with hours and CFS. It looked neat on paper and meaningless in the sky. He hung up and said to no one, "We're late." Downstream, the sheriff's office started getting weather questions, not panic curiosity. Do I need sandbags? Will the park flood? Is the bridge closed? The 911 board that should have been reserved for fire and life filled with forecasts. A dispatcher tried to redirect callers to a website. The site crashed under traffic. They shifted to social media. A rumor about a dam breach trended for 10 minutes, then got buried under a photo of hail on a patio table. Micro-story. At 2:17 p.m., the sheriff stood in front of a whiteboard and drew a line down the river, town names marked in dry erase. He told his deputies to check the low mobiles home parks and the RV park by the bend. Phones kept ringing. One deputy joked that the river would call if it had a problem. Nobody laughed. The sheriff didn't look up when he said, "Order the buses anyway." A minute later, he crossed it out because the buses were already on a school run. The engineer who wrote the memo watched the lake climb in half-foot ticks and thought about the paragraph where he'd used the phrase, "high confidence." He considered sending a follow-up with bolder words, then didn't. He knew the optics. He also knew that a Saturday morning release would have looked wasteful on the evening news. His screen showed the snow line rising into the band of scarlet radar. He clicked refresh, even though the numbers update themselves. Public Works pre-staged barricades at the usual underpasses, treating the coming water like a winter nuisance. The wastewater plant supervisor texted his boss a photo of the influent channel already toddling toward the rim. He asked for permission to bring in extra pumps. The reply came with a question about overtime caps. Minutes matter, so do line items that were set in June. When the rain hit the snow line, it stopped being picturesque. It turned white into runoff and runoff into something with momentum. Upstream calls shifted tone. "We're at spill. We're increasing to match inflow. No, we can't pulse." The county asked the dam for clarity. The dam asked the sky for mercy. The sky answered with another cell. The sheriff finally drafted the evacuation order. It took 10 minutes to route through legal and 2 to enter into the alert system. The alert system did what it was built to do. It tried. Cell networks, already sagging from weather and chatter, choked. Some phones screamed. Some buzzed without lighting up. Some stayed quiet on a charger in a kitchen that would, in a few hours, be part of the river's memory. The delay had done its work. What could have been a slow, visible lowering of the lake across a day became a last-hour scramble across jurisdictions. The difference between a planned inconvenience and a panic is a handful of choices made when the sky was still blue. Tonight, those choices were coming due, and the snow line, now a moving border, kept climbing into colder country, turning the map of safety upside down.